In today's episode of Today in World War II, the remnants of a Soviet division are completely eliminated by the Finns in the Winter War. The Soviets continue to drive the Germans away from Moscow, and they capture a very important city near Moscow. And finally, future very successful U.S. ace Robert Johnson gets a victim in over France. Let's get started. Okay, so as I mentioned yesterday in my video or the day before, the Soviets had made the decision that they were no longer going to try to rescue or resupply the Soviet units that were currently surrounded by the Finns in the Winter War. In this case, the Soviets that were surrounded did try to break out. And today, for example, remnants of the Soviet 163rd Division did try to break out from Suomussalmi. They were trying to get over, they were trying to retreat over the frozen lake, which was Lake Kiantajärvi, but they were destroyed, completely destroyed by the Finnish Ninth Division. And like I said, I can imagine these these poor bastards are trying to get across a frozen lake. You know that it's a heavy, deep, very high snow. And then you've got the Finns who are skiing, they're so mobile and there was no hope. There's just no way they were ever going to get away from the Finns on foot through that heavy snow when the Finns have skis. And that was such an important factor in their success during this part of the Winter War when it was so cold and the conditions favored them as a country and a people that grew up with this. They knew how to live and survive and prosper in those conditions. And you would think the Russians, who had the same kind of weather, would have that, but it was a whole different political environment over there. It was all collectivization, and well, you know how that goes over there. So it wasn't necessarily the same weather, different reaction of the two countries. In this case, the Finns were able to use their, talents and their abilities in a way that the Soviets weren't, and the Soviet 163rd Division certainly paid the price for that. On December 30th, 1941, better news for the Soviets. They continued to drive the Germans away from Moscow. And as their massive counteroffensive continued, they captured Kaluga, which is a provincial town in its uh, one province away from Moscow province. I've been there many times, and they were able to take that provincial city away from the Germans, and then of course the slow driving the Germans back enough to where Moscow was no longer in danger. By this time, Moscow wasn't in danger. They were on the offensive, but still the Wehrmacht was very, very powerful. And as we'll see in 1942, it will come back and show its teeth. But short-term victories were all that was left for the Germans. And even then, the longer the war went, the rarer they became until it just became one defeat after another. So this was just one step in a long process to eject them and destroy them in Berlin. And good for the Soviets for doing that. And then finally on December 30th, 1943, future ace Robert Johnson shot down a German Focke-Wulf aircraft over Soissons, France. Robert Johnson was a very, very good pilot. Obviously, he was one of the highest scoring American aces in the European theater. At this time, they were still flying the P-47, which was not the best aircraft when it came to dogfights. It was very heavy. It couldn't turn with a lighter German aircraft like an Me-109 or a Focke-Wulf 190. But it did have its advantages. It was all about tactics, with the exception of the P-51 Mustang, and then later, in the Pacific Theater, the F-6F and the F-4, Hellcats and the F-4U Corsairs. These fighters could dogfight. They were light enough and they had maneuverability, but the heavier U.S. Army fighter aircraft like the P-47, they could not dogfight in a traditional sense like the Spitfire could, for example. But they had, if they had the right tactics, then they could certainly win and dominate, which they did, and especially in the hands of a great pilot like Robert Johnson was. The advantage, there's a couple of advantages the P-47 had. It was very well armored. It was very tough to shoot down. And boy, that mother effer could dive. And, you know, they were very effective diving on the Germans, or if they felt like they were in a disadvantage, and they could dive away and they could swoop up, either dive and go up, and then, or they could outclimb them and they could shoot down the Germans that way. So they did have advantages. It wasn't like they were just a piece of crap aircraft. They weren't. And of course, as the war moved into France after the invasion, the P-47s became less of a fighter aircraft and more of a fighter bomber, and they were equipped with rockets and bombs. They did an excellent job of ground support in supporting the Allies and the U.S. Army in in France, the Low Countries, and then eventually to Germany. So that is a rather short day. Not much happened during the war on December 30th, but I will see you tomorrow to see what happened on New Year's Eve during World War II. Thank you very much.